Good afternoon, it's Dave at ATI Watch Reviews. Please hit that like button and please smash that subscribe button for more awesome watch content. Little wristwatch check. Got my AD 2040 on, a 200 meter super cheap rubber band quartz diver, very comfortable, and it does have that relief ceramic bezel for 25 quid that I got in a deal off AliExpress. Very comfortable band. Can't really go wrong with it as a beater. Today's video is quite an interesting one because we have two beasts of homages for below 100 GBP. Both watches are well below 100 GBP. Sometimes can be had for closer to 50 quid, which is just unbelievable when you hear what specs in these things. On my left, I have the SD 1953, and on my right, I have the AD 2064. Let's start with the Steeldive. This has been out for a few years now. This is obviously a homage to the you-know-what. It's a classic homage. They've tried to recreate it very similar to the original. It's a 41mm by 13.5mm thick nominal. Flat sapphire crystal, and it is sapphire. Ceramic rotating unidirectional dive bezel in the green. A jet black dial with a Mercedes handset, ringed indices and lume, with obviously the Cyclops, fully solid taper ring stainless steel bracelet with a milled clasp, and it is nicely signed, with a whopping 6 micro adjusts. But no dive extension, strangely. But it does have a safety catch with push buttons. Contrasting with the Addiesdive AD 2064. And they actually do a quartz version of this that I believe they call it the AD 2054. But that has like a Miyota 2115, I think. But this is the NH35 model. This is the automatic version for those that want the automatic. This is again a 41mm watch by around 13mm thick nominal with just a standard flat mineral crystal. It's not a sapphire. Does have a ceramic bezel in this kind of like a garden green colour, with the Fotina, because it is going for a more retro look, fully loomed indices and handset, and it does have the numerals at 9 and 6 to give it a bit more of an unusual look. This also has a fully solid stainless steel bracelet, moving down to an unsigned clasp, sadly. A smaller clasp though, but it is only a tinny pressed swing arm version with only 3 micro adjusts, but it does have push buttons and safety catch. Steeldive and Addiesdive originally, I believe, were the same company, but they branched off a few years ago during COVID to do their own thing, although perhaps they are still owned by the same overall company. I'm not 100% sure, and I don't think it's that easy to get that kind of information out of the country that they're from. But I'm going to now, for the purpose of this video, say that they're different companies, but originally they weren't. They were basically one and the same. Let's start with sizing. Let's start with the Steeldive. So that has a bezel diameter of 40.6, so it's less than 41mm. There's an overall diameter of 44.5, a lug to lug of 47.4, So quite a nice lug to lug actually. And a thickness of 13.4 versus 2064, a diameter of 40.3, so slightly smaller, an overall diameter of 45.1, a lug to lug of 47.6, so very similar, and a thickness of only 13 mil, so it is a bit thinner. So on sizing, they're almost indistinguishable. And even on the metric that I haven't shown you, which would be the end link to end link, they're both about 53. So they're even very similar in that respect. They're just similar in every respect, really, for the sizing. Let's get them weighed. So the SD53 is 177 grams versus 171 grams. And I have removed one link from each, I believe. So the SD53 in my left hand is ever so slightly heavier. That makes sense because it's nearly 0.5 millimeter thicker than the AD2064 in my right hand. But that's the only real metric. On wrist, you can't really discern that. On sizing, the winner would ever so slightly go then to the AD2064, with it being slightly less weight and also slightly smaller, thinner by nearly 0.5 mil. On crystals, both watches have a completely flat crystal that is ever so slightly proud of the bezel by about 0.5 mil. On the SD53, it is indeed a sapphire crystal. But on the AD2064, it isn't. It's just a mineral crystal. But it is also almost identically proud of the bezel by about 0.5 mil. Now the dials is where there is an obvious difference. The 1953 has adopted a much more classic appearance with the Mercedes handset, the ringed circular indices. It's all very common, nothing unusual, your straight up homage. But they've done a really good job. The black is an absolute jet black. There is nothing on that dial, it is just a total black abyss. Obviously you've got the Steeldive branding, which isn't for everyone. Automatic 300 meter, but it works very nicely. The green they've used on the bezel contrasts very nicely with that black dial. And the stainless steel, it's a nice classic look. On the 2064, however, they've gone with a much more, I would call it a garden green, which for me personally isn't to my taste, especially with the Fotina. And it is a lot more busier because they've put a much bigger chapter ring on it, which makes it kind of hard to discern against the indices which are in Fotina. Addiesdive also adopt a bizarre logo, which is not to everyone's taste. I much prefer the classic look of the 1953, but that is my opinion. I think that the numerals on the 2064 are not big enough. I want the 9 and 6 to be a lot bigger. As well, I'm not the biggest fan of the fact that there's only 9 and 6 and not, 12 or 3 o'clock. But I can see why when they've put it on, they've put a Cyclops on it, why they've not put obviously a 3 there. So this is one of the more subjective of the criteria. But on appearance of the dial, I would give it to the 1953. On the actual branding itself, like how professional and how well have they done it, they're both equally as basically absurd as each other. That's the way I would describe it. I can't really, I don't really have much to say about that logo really, other than obviously this is a sporty, tongue-in-cheek brand. It is not an ultra serious, pretentious watch brand. It is not that. You know, it's a sporty, fun weekend watch. That's what they're going for. That's why they've chose that kind of branding. So I'll give it a draw on the branding in that sense. For bezels, the 1953 is quite a lot of resistance there to turn. Only a little bit of backplay though, but it's quite difficult to grip and it's got a lot of resistance. It's not bad, but it's nowhere near the best I've seen on AliExpress. The 2064 is far easier to turn. There's nowhere near as much resistance. But it does feel cheap, I will be honest with you. And there's more backplay on that one. So I'll give it to a draw. For the crowns, that's definitely smooth. Both the NH35. Yeah, that's a very smooth one as well. And this is the NH35, it's not a quartz. That's the 2054. I'll give the winner ever slightly on the crown to the 2064. Case design, they're both basically identical, other than this is a thinner one. The lugs are very similar on both watches. They both have this fat, slabby, chunky look. They're both not particularly curved. They have this very slabby feel on the wrist, which I like. So I'll give it a draw on the case design. In terms of case backs, the SD 1953 with a laser engraved emblem, 300 meter dive by Steeldive versus very similar case back. I'll give it a draw on that. Moving on to bracelets, and they both have a nice tapering, fully solid 3-link bracelets. A very nice but larger clasp on the 1953, but it is, well, the swing arms at least are milled. Not the most perfect mechanism. Engagement and disengagement could definitely be improved on both the safety and on the main clasp. You do have 6 micro adjusts, which is very good. You don't normally get that. You normally only get 3 or 4. That's very good. The links are nicely polished. It's adequate. The outer flanks are highly polished, and obviously the bodies are brushed. Decent articulation. It is only push pins, but that is fine. We get arrows. You can always put some Loctite on it if you want. And this is a 20 to 18 mil taper. And on the 2064, we've got a very similar setup. 3-link bracelet, very similar style, brush body, polished flanks, same taper, 20 to 18. A smaller clasp though, with only 3 micro adjusts, no signature, very tinny, cheap. You can always swap it though, but believe it or not, the engagement is probably better on that. It's a more surer mechanism, but again, both will be absolutely fine. They've never come loose for me. I've worn them quite a bit. And it also has, as you would expect at this very cheap end, just push pins. And the push pins work perfectly adequately. I'm going to give the winner, because of the superior clasp, obviously, I'm going to give the winner to Steeldive. But they are both as comfortable, if not, really, this one's probably more comfortable slightly because it has a more comfortable clasp, slightly. Let's get them on wrist. And that's them on wrist. I think that looks pretty decent. What do you think? I mean, I can't really distinguish any difference in weight. They're both on the higher end. They're both nearly 180 grams. You don't really want to go much heavier than that as an all-day wear, or it might become, you know, uncomfortable. But these are at the top end of comfort, but they are very comfortable still. You can always put them on a NATO band, Zulu. You can put them on a rubber band, but they would be a little bit top heavy to put on a rubber band. But you can get them on some very good Homage bands that are rubber on AliExpress with a nice big clasp with a sliding lock, if you know what I'm referring to. And they work like a charm on that type of band. I really like these. 300 meter versus only 200 meter. Sapphire, no sapphire. But weigh slightly less and smaller clasp. Now let's check the loom. I think it's clear that the more powerful loom is the newer Addiesdive on the right. The older SD 1953 with the turquoise loom is not as powerful. That green on the Addiesdive is very good, but only the pip is loomed on the bezel, whereas on the older one the bezel is indeed loomed. That's it in full darkness. So, in conclusion, which would I pick? Well, the only reason I would pick the 2064 is if I wanted the appearance of the dial. They are very similar in every other regard. Or if I wanted a quartz version, because they do this one in the quartz. Now, the difference overall is not great. It's more going to be about, do you want to have the look of the more Fotina retro style of the 2064, or do you want the more classic, more generic style of the 1953? And personally, I prefer the 1953. But it is absolutely more boring. This does arguably look more, I know it's a more retro, but it looks a little bit more unusual. It's not as common. So that would definitely be one reason to pick up the 2064. It's going to be ever so slightly comfier being thinner and also being slightly lighter. So it's horses for courses. Which one do you want? The 300 meter versus the 200 meter diver, you'll never notice really, because let's be honest with you, no one's actually going to go diving with it. If I was going to get this one, I'd probably get it in the black, because I think the black goes with the Fotina, you know, the sand indices and numerals so much better than the green they've chosen on this watch is not to my taste. This kind of like olivey green. I prefer the more punchy green of the 1953, and I also prefer the style of the dial slightly, but I already have many homages like this, so maybe I will keep this one. The other things going for the 2064, however, is it's slightly lighter, about 8 grams lighter, and it's slightly thinner at only 13 mil, whereas this is closer to 13 and a half. So it is going to be ever so slightly, but I can't really tell, less bulkier with this being ever so slightly lighter. So it's a horses for courses one. They're both very decent attempts at what is ultimately a massively overdone watch homage. However, for less than 100 quid, for what is ultimately, you can get it for closer to 60 odd quid. I think they're bargains, I really do. You can whack them on a Zulu, whack them on a NATO, put them on a rubber band. I know just the rubber band for these watches to put them on. You can get them off AliExpress with a nice big sliding clasp, you know, an on-the-fly adjustment clasp. Very good. I do recommend both of these watches. My favourite is the more classic 1953, but this is not bad at all. If I was going to pick the 2064, I'd get it in black. I think it contrasts much better with the Fotina. They're both very decent attempts. There's affiliate link down below if you want to pick it up and make a tiny bit of commission or extra cost to you. It's been Dave. Hope you've liked this video. Cheers.